Committee of the Whole is called to order. My colleagues, we will now proceed with the amendments of Chapter 1. You will find it in your drive under Chapter 1, Substitute Bill 55-36 COR Chapter 1. We will begin with the first amendment introduced by Senator Mary Torres. Ma'am, you have the floor.
Siduous Masti, Mr. Chair. The amendment that I'm proffering is on the folder drive. It is the amendment that is SB 55 MCT, line 23, page 3, COTW. Mr. Chair, this amendment proposes a very modest, but I believe justifiable increase to the BPT. OFB confirmed for us yesterday that the positive impact of the spending of what could be over $500 million in ARPA funds was not incorporated into the revenue estimates. But we know that when you inject what could be over $500 million into the economy, the spending by the government, whether it be on direct service, utilizing local businesses, providing direct grants to businesses to spend on their operations, etc., there has to be some positive impact on the general fund revenues. Therefore, my amendment assumes the positive impact of spending ARPA funds on services locally. Because we do not know how the funds are spent and the speed at which it will be spent, I am assuming just a very modest amount of $100 million in ARPA funds will be attributable to business growth receipts, which would increase OFB's business privilege tax projection by $5 million. Because we are increasing BPT, we did have to also increase the allocation and appropriation to the pharmaceutical fund, which is 6.19% of all business privilege taxes, and that is on the next line, 25. This leaves us with an excess of approximately $4.6 million, which, if successful, I intend to earmark for nurse pay and other critical increases to public safety. Mr. Chair, I want to please note that any additional increases to BPT discussed previously, I will continue to listen intently, but at this time, I just wanted to provide a justification for at least $5 million increase to the business privilege tax. So if we look at the amendments made to the business privilege tax, beginning on line 23 of page 3, it increases it from 238,928,196 to 243,928,196. The GMH Pharmaceutical Fund would also then have a corresponding increase from 14,789 to 655 to 15,099,155. And then the corresponding adjustments follow in the subsequent lines where applicable. So that would be my amendment, Mr. Chair, essentially to increase very modest and reasonable $5 million increase to the business privilege tax number. Page 3, beginning first with line 24.
Thank you, Senator Torres. My colleagues, I was just informed and didn't realize it, but recognize that there was an amendment that impacts from the beginning a lot higher than what you're asking for, Senator Torres, and I just want to let it be known that there was an amendment introduced by the Speaker that came after Senator Torres, but it impacts the top portion of starting with page 1, lines 1. So there may be, if anyone wants to call that, we go to that amendment first and then adjust it as we move. Senator Tello?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Considering that the amendment prior to that, or another amendment, is actually going to speak above, like you mentioned earlier. I think it's only prudent for us to recognize that first, but Mr. Chair, before I left for lunch, when I was looking at the amendments, so in other words, we're looking at L23, page 3, but what about L22, page 8? Is that, okay, that's later on, I guess, in the...
That was inadvertently submitted. 23 is what we are discussing.
Okay, so we strike out the L22. That one is no longer on the floor.
It's redundant. It's duplicative. So 23 is what.
Okay, because the First Amendment was using the EITC to fund the pay increase for the nurses, and then now we're at L23, which now adjusts the BPT, raises the BPT to accommodate for this pay raise, if I'm not mistaken.
Mr. Chair, I'm only dealing with L23, page 3 at this time, since that is the page that we are on.
Okay, so it's increasing it's increasing.
So it
And if I
it does the same thing.
Yeah, and essentially, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to also mention that I believe that in entertaining this measure, because it was the first one in, it's basically an amendment to the same funding source, which is the BPT. So I don't know if you were
Okay.
suggesting that it not be entertained at this moment, but I believe it's basically the same thing.
Being that there's no objection where we're at right now, we'll just go ahead and continue. Does any of my colleagues would like to speak to this amendment?
Mr. Chair, if I may ask the author,
Yes.
what was the reasoning for the increase on the BPT, and is there any intention of using or adjusting this increase to retrofit, incorporating spending for another area, like the pay raise for the nurses?
Understood. Senator Torres, do you yield to that question?
I do. I'll just reiterate my statement that was made previously, which is this amendment assumes that there is a positive impact of spending the ARPA funds on services locally. And because we do not know how the funds are spent and at the speed at which it will be spent, we're just assuming, I am assuming a very modest amount of $100 million in ARPA funds that will be attributed to business gross receipts. And this $100 million would increase the OFB's BPT projections by $5 million. And what I had intended is that I had intended to use, and then there's a corresponding thing to the pharmaceutical fund because of the required percentage of BPT taxes. But this excess of $4.6 million after you also adjust the pharmaceutical fund will result in approximately $4.6 million, which I intend to earmark for nurse pay and other critical areas to public safety. So essentially nurse pay and other critical areas as we go down the road.
All right, thank you. Senator Tello, do you have a follow-up to that? Since you still have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think, Mr. Chair, the intention for this increase in the BPT the intention of course, is for the pay raises for the nurses. However, the study, I haven't seen a study that was done. I don't know if maybe my office was the only one that didn't get this study, or any kind of resolution or anything that was passed to increase this pay raise. So, Mr. Chair, does the author of the legislation actually have something in hand to show this salary was, or this pay raise was signed, sealed, and delivered to us saying it's approved? I mean, I didn't see anything passing in law, so just curious.
All right, Senator Tello. Senator Torres, would you yield to the question?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, there was a letter submitted to your office on August 12th where I had given you notice, the committee notice that I intended to submit an amendment to this effect. Essentially, the reason is on June 17, 2021, Governor Lou Leon Guerrero signed a memorandum submitted by the Department of Administration to adjust the base pay increment of nursing positions under the GovGuam Nurse Pay Plan by approximately 15%. And this long overdue increase aligned with the intent of a measure that was introduced by several senators earlier this year to establish a competitive compensation rate for our local nurses. As a second step in addressing Guam's party pay disparity, the DOA memorandum further recommended a nurse professional pay differential authorized for positions covered under the nurse pay plan, with a 15% differential rate for the Department of Public Health and Social Services, a 25% differential rate for the Guam Memorial Hospital, and a 25% differential rate for the Guam Behavioral Health and Wellness Center, and a 10% differential rate for the Guam Department of Education. And DOA estimated the cost at approximately $4.4 million. The governor has already recommended this recommendation, and also that they had recommended that we incorporate this into the fiscal year 2022 and subsequent budgets. So essentially, we are following up on a memorandum that was signed by the governor also that gave this pay differential in August 2017. So in other words, there was a first step where the Department of Administration made a recommendation to the governor, and then the second step was to also add, in addition to the 15%, a professional pay differential for the nurses. The governor signed this memorandum from DOA and made it in June of 2021, and it was effective in August. So we're just carrying forward and funding what was already implemented by the governor of Guam.
All right, thank you, Senator. Senator Tello, it's in the, I was just
thank you.
advised by the clerk.
Can you give me 1 minute so I can find it? Because
Yes,
you just met,
it's under materials.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. If
we'll-
I can have 1 minute to look at this.
We'll
'cause-
come back to you.
Okay, thank you.
Any other colleague would like to speak on
I'm sorry,
the-
I meant August 17th, not August 2017.
But they'll be able to see it on the drive. Does anyone else like to speak to that? Senator Brown.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I think there's a whole bunch of things many of us would like to fund, and justifiably so, because I'm sure after the nurses, there are going to be other entities in the government of Guam that are going to feel the need to want to also have a pay raise. I didn't get that memo that I work for the governor, though. I didn't get that memo. I don't know if anyone else got that memo here. So, I mean, it's nice the governor wanted to implement the pay raise. I don't know how she decided to put this in the budget to fund it. Last time I checked, I didn't know the governor made law, even though we were quite frequently seeing executive orders left and right, up and down, as if, this is a one-woman show here in this government. I have a very different perspective, and while I understand the sponsor of this amendment certainly wants to advocate for the nurses, I mean, earlier this year we were told, and she had funded a study, which I concur with Senator Tello, I've not seen. I don't doubt you can probably justify it, but I think one of the things that have become clear to me, at least in the last week and a half here of hearing the presentation by the administration's representatives here, is while they seem to want to do certain things, they don't seem to want to be forthcoming with information with regards to how they're going to spend ARP funds. We're expected to pass a budget and fund everything out of the general fund as if the general fund's the most stable source of money in this government, which we know is not the case. It's not a limited, it's not an unlimited basket of revenue. During a time when outside, these doors and windows that are always closed in the session hall, there's a very different reality going on out there, and I would like to prepare for that reality. We have a number of government of Guam employees also, Mr. Chairman, that I also want to ensure that we have the ability to continue to pay their salaries. Because I've experienced 32-hour work weeks. Some of our colleagues here I know have as well. And while right now, yesterday it was raining very heavily, maybe in the minds of some, money's raining from heaven here. I'm very concerned where we're going to be this time next year. And it's not just because of doom and gloom, it's because of experience and reality. I just cannot believe that such a significant impact to our economy has happened over the last year and a half. And we can operate as if that doesn't exist, because it's not affecting us, because we continue to get our paychecks. Even though there's others we hear that are suffering, but that's okay, we just hear about it. It's not affecting our household. And so I'm very cautious, and I'm asking my colleagues to please consider being very cautious, because my goodness, nobody here has an entitlement to wanting to be the champion of advocating. I want to advocate for the police officers and the fire people and other people in the healthcare profession. How about the educators out there? The list is endless. But if we're going to just BPT because we want to fund certain things on our agenda, then I want $500,000 or $2 million more for the hydrogeologic survey and my pet projects and my constituency that I advocate for and receive, because why should only certain people here have millions at their disposal? If we're going to be serious about being responsible to this community and ensuring that existing employees, existing critical operations of this government are going to be met, I think we need to be a little cautious on how we're looking at banding about spending money, especially, Mr. Chair, when the governor's own representatives here were not forthcoming. We still have no idea how they're intending to spend ARP money. And we're wanting to spend money that doesn't exist yet. We're jumping, oh my goodness, then let's do all the other funds we're looking at. Oh my goodness, we're getting our refunds back from the federal government. Let's use that funding. We're having a stampede right now, when we really should be a lot more conservative moving forward. I don't agree with the Director of Administration that this is not a time to be conservative. Maybe his perspective from his view and vantage point is very different. But I think we see the realities out there in our community. I want to take care of existing what's now, because I don't know what the future holds. And I don't necessarily know Uncle Sam's going to be handing over money. If the U.S. economy continues to recover, and unfortunately now our president's got other issues to worry about, if that doesn't continue, where are we going to be? Where are we going to be with the people that in the next few weeks are not, you see it in the paper every day, the countdown. What about them? What are we going to do about that? Is the money going to come out of the Gov Guam coffers? And whose department and agencies are going to come from? I just think it's self-serving to put amounts in here, because sure, there are things I want to fund, but I've come to the determination I'm not going to ask for one other penny. I've not asked for a penny in this budget for anything. And I got one vote like everybody else here. But I think we need to be cautious. We need to be cautious. This legislation as it's presented is eliminating the rainy day fund. We are putting no local money in this budget aside for potential emergencies that are coming. They're coming. So I have no issue with supporting the nurses if we could look at it from a more direct and practical standpoint, and let's see the revenue come in. This view, Mr. Chair, that, oh my God, we got to do it all in the budget now because it's budget time. I've been in legislatures, we have come back 3, 4, 5, 6 times in a single fiscal year. If that's what's needed to adjust, once we see the revenue, show me the money. If the money's there, then let's talk about where we can appropriate it. But I don't see that in the numbers. I'm sure you have confidence in your fiscal team that has provided their presentation here. I'm comfortable with what they've presented. So I have no interest and no support will come from me in increasing 1 penny on the BPT estimate. Because colleagues, I don't want to give and be put in a position of having to take away. I'd rather have some confidence knowing when we're giving these raises. And granted, I understand, plus nobody here has been immune from the realities of the pandemic that we are experiencing, not just here, but worldwide. And certainly our healthcare personnel are very critical to that process. But right now, Mr. Chair, when we can't even guarantee we're getting medicines, and we've all seen the listing of medicines that GMH does not have in their pharmacy to provide to patients, come on. I don't want to sugarcoat this, and I don't know how any other way to be more direct about this, but be it this or anything else being put on the table, even the things I would really want to see, I will not support increasing our estimate on the BPT, not during this time. I don't think we can be removed from the realities out there. We're talking about pay raises when people out there soon will not have much on their table. And I just don't think that's responsible. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Brown. Does anyone else, any of my colleagues would like to speak? And if not, I'll go back to Senator Tello. Senator Tello, did you find that document or?
Yes, Mr. Chair, and this document is at least 8 pages long. And you expect us right now, I mean, to look at this, especially when there's things in here that talk about, increasing this on the first step. I mean, I'm just at the section, Mr. Chair, where it talks about the nurse pay plan structure for the first step to recommend a structure adjustment by approximately 15% based on pay increments. And then it goes on further to talk, it just talks about it, Mr. Chair, but there's nothing here from DOA giving us the numbers, the true numbers on how much this is going to cost us. Like I said, it's 8 pages long. I'm going through it right now. Here, implementation. They do, this is from, okay, Department of Ministry. Okay, now we're seeing the amount that they've incorporated based on. So, Mr. Chair, like I said, this is 8 pages long. Can you please give me the courtesy for another 5 minutes so I can just go through this? Because this is very important. We're looking at raising the BPT when we heard from OFB, trying to be very, very conservative. And here it is when, why didn't the administration bring this up much earlier, even before we hit into budget? Before you even printed this out, this budget bill out, Mr. Chair? Why wasn't this brought up? Because it said it was in June. Well, I'm looking at when this was dated, June 17, Mr. Chair. This was dated June 17th. So why wasn't it incorporated into the budget bill? I think because we were being conservative.
All right, Senator Tello, maybe you may want to address that to the OFB.
Okay.
And then maybe that will give you the answer of me, other than me saying it.
Okay, thank you,
Okay.
Mr. Chair. Steve, can you please answer that? I mean, this was dated June 17th. I don't know if you got the memo that all of a sudden the governor's deciding to increase the salary. I mean, does she have that authority, to do that and put it in an MOU and saying, okay, we're going to increase the salary now? And did she actually provide where that funding source is going to come from on this pay increase?
Yes, Senator. I have in my hand the copy of the letter from the governor to Director Burns. And it did outline exactly what Senator Torres mentioned earlier about the funding needs of the nurses and other healthcare professional recruitment and retention Incentive Act of 1998. Along with this letter, I received a letter. Well, the governor submitted a letter to the chairman of the Appropriations Committee on July 15th, requesting for the same amounts reflected in her June 17th letter, asking that these amounts be incorporated into the FY2022 budget. In the same letter, she also indicated that the cost to implement the salary adjustment is being taken care of in FY21. These amounts are not part of the FY21 budget appropriation. So she's finding, I guess she identified funds to cover the cost for the implementation of this pay adjustment in FY21. For FY22, you looked at the department's appropriations, and because we were almost setting the ceilings for the agencies, it was difficult to find $4.5 million at the time we were doing this. So we went back to each one of the agencies and kind of determined whether or not these agencies can absorb this cost. And in my estimate, I believe they can, without additional appropriation adding on to the FY22. So that is my assessment today. Despite everything that has happened, it is still something that I think is reasonable. Although we did not include in any way when we developed this budget any ARP money, that money is available. So not to say that I was banking that the ARP money would cover any additional costs not reflected in the FY22 budget. Please bear in mind that is a funding source for anything that we didn't consider in this budget.
Thank you, Steve. It makes sense. I appreciate all the hard work that you put into this, especially when it came to something like this, because I'm sure we all have the same sentiments when it comes to helping those, especially our frontliners. And if anything, the governor's ARP funding, the hospitals, one area, almost guaranteed that'd be approved by the federal government to allow the spending or the incorporation of funding and shortfalls to be placed into is the hospital and public health. I don't think there's no doubt about it. But knowingly, Steve, you knew about this at the very beginning, and while formulating the budget bill, you feel that there is funding within the budget bill, within the department to shoulder this additional cost. And again, by the way, Steve, when is this implemented? On August 17th, it begins, when does this start? This pay increase?
My understanding, Senator, is that it wasn't implemented across the board at the same time for all 4 agencies.
Okay.
I believe, if I'm not mistaken, for yeah, so my understanding is, according the way I interpret the letter that she submitted on July 15th, I'm assuming that it's already implemented. But from information that we received from the agencies, it hasn't been. So although she says on her July 15th letter that she's able and capable of funding it for
Okay.
FY21, I assume that it will be paid in FY21.
Okay.
When the actual date commences for each one of these agencies, that I do not know.
Okay, but hearing from the governor that she can be able to handle whatever salary increase there is starting in FY21, that she's able to, there's a lot of questions we had that weren't answered about where they're putting the money, the shell game with the money, but it's obvious they said straight out, they have the funding for it. And for them to be able to, the hospital, to be able, or the other agents being able to shoulder any kind of increase like this was put into perspective by OFB when formulating the budget. So this, like I said, was a June 15th, way before this budget bill was put together and handed to us. So, Mr. Chair, with all due respect, the whole purpose here too is not to increase the BPT, which we've been fighting for the last two months, kind of proving to the administration that, no, this is being a conservative approach, especially we don't know, and coming from OFB, that next year and the year next, 23, are going to be very trying times for the government of Guam. We have to be conscious of that at all times. Not just today, sitting here today, but at all times. Now, if the governor has to be forced to use ARP to cover some of their shortfalls, then we're praying she does do that. But in the meantime, we need to be conservative. Some of us even feel that, actually, no offense to you, Steve, it's still quite high. So, Mr. Chair, with all due respect, I have to object to this and ask my colleagues to please. We need to be conservative and stay within our budget that's been presented to us and well thought out, when it comes to BPT. At least when it comes to BPT. Well thought out, discussed. It doesn't mean, Mr. Chair, my objections that the pay raise is not going to happen. The pay raise will happen because the governor seems to have found it in 2021, and they can find it in their budget for 2022 based on OFB's calculations that it's cushioned in here in this budget.
All right,
So let's be conservative, and with all due respect, I have to object.
all right, thank you. Steve, you wanted to, Mr. Guerrero?
Yeah, I was just provided a note just 5 seconds ago. My understanding is as far as the nurses' pay, it has been implemented in GDOE starting August 2nd.
Does any other colleague would like to speak to this amendment? Speaker?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank the offerer of this amendment, sponsor. I fully support pay raises for nurses, and I'm glad that they are being implemented. In fact, I ran into nurses in the last couple of weeks who did confirm that they are excited to be getting their increased pay. And so, but OFB is confirming that none of the agencies came in and asked for additional during our budget hearings. Is that right?
That's correct, Senator.
All right. I guess I wanted to just, if the sponsor would yield, ask about the formula. So, if I heard it correctly, we're looking at about if you take 100 million in ARPA, that might yield 5 million in BPT. Can I just confirm if that's how we came to this number with the sponsor, if she would yield? Mr. Chair.
For OFB,
Oh,
right?
no, I'm asking if the sponsor would yield, if that's a formula that she used. I wrote it down, so I just want to confirm it's correct.
Yeah.
That 100 million of ARPA would yield approximately 5 million in BPT.
Yes, I'll yield.
Senator Torres, you
yeah.
yield to the
Yes,
question,
I'll
okay?
yield. Thank you. I thought it was going to OFB. Essentially, if we take a modest assumption that $100 million of ARPA is floating in the local economy, 5% of $100 million is $5 million. So that was the very short calculation.
Point of information, if I may, Mr. Chair, we heard from Gary Hiles that any funding for federally that comes into the economy from 100 million would only yield a 10%, so it would be only 1 million, if I'm not mistaken. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Madam Speaker, you still have the floor.
Thank you. Yeah,
Before
and
I go
I
back
want to
to
thank the sponsor for that estimate. And if I remember Gary Howes also, he said that that was if it was contracts, right? And so some of this ARP money is going to be spent on contracts, just like military contract. He used that formula for military contracts, that if we take a $1 billion contract, we can estimate 10% of that might find its way to our revenues. However, he also, I thought, very interestingly made a point that if we use our ARP money for direct aid, putting it directly into the hands of people that need it, such as the RISE program, that the return to the government of Guam is even greater. Just wanted to put that on the record. But otherwise, I thank the sponsor for yielding, and Sidus Masi, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Senator Duenas, you've got the floor, sir.
Jesus Masi, Mr. Chairman. And I certainly understand the value of moving this amendment. However, I think that OFB has basically answered the question for now. One thing I want to mention is, because this is no secret, Mr. Chairman, if there ever is a place, at least for now, to use ARP, it would be this area. There's no secret that right now we have contract nurses getting us through this pandemic. And we've used CARES Act funds to do that. These nurses are paid at a rate double, sometimes double plus what our nurses are being paid. So I think as we start cycling out, and as the University of Guam continues to produce excellent nurses, excellent healthcare professionals, certainly we have to continue to visit this issue of the pay for recruitment and retention. When you look at the ARP and the effects of COVID on a community, I cannot think of an area that is more directly affected than with our nursing and frontliners. So, to be consistent, I have to do that. Otherwise, I've been on the record that I completely concur with OFB's numbers, but I think that we have to implore the governor, as she's already done, and as DOE has been mentioned, that DOE, obviously they have their own funding source. They fund their nurses, correct? Through their appropriations. Obviously, they've taken it into consideration within their own budget ceiling. And so, with that, like I said, I definitely agree with the intent. And I definitely agree that if we come back for some reason that there is brighter days ahead, I'm certain that for the purposes of appropriation, we would ask those agencies to quickly incorporate that into the request. But I think we have no authority, Chairman. We've heard it time and time again. And I got to respect that you said it to us. Although I'm frustrated by it, like you're frustrated, I like the fact that you set the ground rules. Look, we're not appropriating ARP here, and I get it. But we can certainly implore that it be used for its intended and vital purposes. So for that reason, Mr. Chairman, I think the governor should take up the mantle and use ARP for this.
Thank you. Senator, and just for a little bit of correction, 1% of 100 million is 10 million. So if they're going to use 1% or 10%, that's more than enough money. 10% of 100 million is $10 million. So there's money at that side, not here. Does any other colleague would like to speak to this amendment? So that Senator Ada.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To the Director of OFB, Mr. Guerrero, you did say that within the budget packet that we have currently, that they would be able to find the $4 million for the raises, right?
Yes, Senator. I'm referring to the governor's letter dated July 15th to the chairman of the Appropriations Committee. And it says, and I said, I'll note, it says here that under my transfer authority, I can fund these pay adjustments for the remaining of the current fiscal year. However, she's asking for assistance from the budget to provide funding for the next year's pay adjustments. So yes, she is paying for this year's pay adjustments.
Thank you, Mr. Guerrero.
Point of
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
information, may I please? I really feel that I need
Excuse
to
me.
interject.
Senator Torres? Yes, you want to do close? Did you need a copy of that letter? We can provide you.
I need to speak to that letter because I have a copy of that letter, and it's dated July 15th, 2021. Steve, first of all, when do the agencies submit their budget requests? It's before July or even June, right?
I do believe that the budget requests are due from the agencies to BBMR by January 31st.
Okay.
From that point on, they kind of like staggered being submitted to OFB. This year, I did believe we got it in,
Okay,
I think, March, somewhere around
all right.
March.
If I may, please, Mr. Chair, I feel that I need to correct on the record because I believe there's a misunderstanding about what the governor's letter actually says. It's a letter dated July 15th to the Honorable Joe S. San Augustine, and it's regarding nurse professional pay structure and differential. It states that on June 17th, I approved adjustments to the nurse professional pay structure. This is the governor. And nurse professional pay differential rates. As a result, public nurses will receive 15% base pay increment in addition to a separate agency differential rate. Under her transfer authority, she funded these pay adjustments for the remainder of the current fiscal year. That's correct. However, I need your assistance as budget chair to provide funding for these pay adjustments in fiscal year 2022 and subsequent budgets. The estimated costs for each agency are as follows, and she goes down the line. So the point that I want to make is, and she goes on to say that it reflects base salary adjustments only, it doesn't reflect specialty pay, night differential, that sort of thing. But what I want to point out, Mr. Chair, is that this was done in June 17th, it was approved. And less than a month later, she requested that we consider it for the budget. Now, understanding that the budget request was made way in advance, right? It was made months before this adjustment. So the point of it is, when I reviewed the substitute version of Bill 5536, I contacted your offices to ask, were these nurse pay increases factored in to the budget? And you said no. So the discussion was, well, please, let's do this per the governor's request on July 15th, understanding that the submission was already made, right? This was something that was done months after the submission for the budget request was made. And so the point of it was we believed that it was an oversight on their part, or not on their part, because their budget submission happened way before this salary adjustment was made. And it was all made, again, in the midst of a pandemic. It was made in the midst of a pandemic to address the dire situation with the nurses, to help them out, to keep them motivated, to keep them in, to keep them working. And the reason that we're asking for this adjustment now is because it wasn't an oversight necessarily, because they couldn't have contemplated something that wasn't implemented until June. It wasn't agreed on until June. But right after that, she contacted your office by a letter and said, please consider factoring this into the budget bill. I need your assistance. So did they fail to do it? Not necessarily, because it was after the fact. They didn't fail to do it because she sent this letter, timely sent this letter asking for our help. And all I'm trying to do is fill a gap. So that's all this is, and this $5 million we believe is a very reasonable, it's a reasonable assumption to increase the BPT by that much.
Senator, you're right. We did get the letter requesting assistance to fund these obligations in FY22. As I said earlier, we did consider it. We looked at their budgets and felt that since we've already kind of like solidified the FY22 budget levels, we felt that utilizing other avenue or budget tools such as the governor's transfer, such as, hopefully any type of potential lapses, that these are the type of things that governor's transfers are capable of covering. They used the same mechanism in FY21 this year to cover an obligation that was not budgeted. It was not funded in FY21, and they were still able to do it. We are giving the departments basically what they're requesting in FY22, although for these specific agencies, these costs were not included. But I would like to think to the budget, you know, avenues that, not, the budget, I can't even think the word, the governor's transfer, they would be able to be covered costs like these unforeseen costs in FY22 like we do every year. So it wasn't that it wasn't an oversight, it wasn't that we didn't include it. It's just that's how we approach this particular request.
Senator Torres, a very short comment from me. Number one, when we do the budget, when there's a request for funding, first thing we do is we look at the agency's funding. If we see there's adequate funding there, not adequate, but sufficient funding, then we leave it alone. Good example is GDOE, dated July. Each agency were heard. They all knew what was coming. They all knew that the pay raise is in the mist. It's in the air. GDOE, July 15. Did they ask for money for the pay raise? No. We didn't solidify this budget, and we kept our doors open and our phones on to make sure that if there's something we're missing, I would reach out to OB and says, can we find the funding? And the response I got was, there's sufficient funding in their budget. I support the pay raise for nurses. My parents went to the hospital, so I know, and they passed away, so I know what it feels like. I've been to the hospital many times. I understand public health. I understand DOE, because I was on the board of DOE. I understand the nurses. I support their pay raise. But at this point, because there's sufficient funding in their budget, that's why we didn't include it. Now, next year's budget, if they put in their staffing pattern, we will fund it, 100%, because we've done that for everybody. Everybody's warm bodies funded. That's how we would treat it. And all they had to do was say at their hearing, anticipate it. Then we would be so noted, then we'd have to add it on. And we would have taken care of it, Senator Torres. I want to take care of the nurses. There's no doubt about that. Senator Torres. And before we go on, does anyone else like to speak? Senator, you still have the floor. I apologize.
Finish up. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Guerrero, for that information. And as long as that increase is already covered, then I feel comfortable. Thank you, sir.
Point of inquiry, Mr. Chair, just a point of inquiry. The increase in the BPT, what was it attributed to? What's the?
What Senator Torres?
Yeah. Why? I know I did mistakenly say 100,000 yields only 1 million. I mean 100 million yields only 1 million when it's 10 million. But this is an increase of $5 million. What is going to be changing to allow that $5 million?
If you look at the sheet, it just changes the bottom line general fund revenue from 617 to 622. There's an impact to the general fund. Keep in mind, every time you change the budget numbers, it changes. There's different factors in the budget that changes. To include the MOE with DOE, include other factors, and we'd have to sit down and submit that to the system we have that has a formula, and then it will tell us all the changes. So it's not as easy as, why don't we just change this? Yeah, okay, we'll change it. We would sit down during session, and they'll start figuring out what is the impact across the board. Okay? When you make changes anywhere, it changes quite a few parts in the budget. And we got to make sure, but the intent is good. There's no doubt about that. I fully support the intent. Unfortunately,
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think we all do support the nurses, but there is sufficient funds. Thank you.
Thank you. Does any other colleague would like to speak to the amendment? If not, Senator Nelson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that it appears that there's a realization here that there's hundreds of millions of dollars that are going to be either reimbursed by the federal government or given to the or reimbursed by the federal government or and given to governments of Guam for various projects. We just heard yesterday that DRT is going to be reimbursed $93.5 million for their taxes, for the ACTC, the CTC, and we've never seen this done before for the CTC and in the EITC. We've never seen this done before. So those three categories. Then we have the $625 million of ARP money that we, or $600 million, let's just say $600 million in ARP money that we as a legislative body asked the governor to put emphasis in certain areas for the community through channeling that money into agencies. Then we also have additional money in regards to addressing the unemployment and our PUA, where in this July 12, 2021 article, the government is going to subsidize $9.25 an hour per worker for 480 work hours. And so this is the additional help that the government is giving the community to boost our business and our economy. And so, Mr. Chair, you know, I support the intent, yes. But the intent is only as good as our actions. And I know that we're coming in this crossroads of raising the BPT, but this is direct money that's being pushed into the government, pushed into Guam, that we are not accounting for because that's not what we do in how we address budget and appropriations. And last year during COVID, when we didn't know what we were facing, when this virus was taking so many people's lives, we had our nurses stand up and say, I'm going to work. They even moved nurses from DOE into the hospital and public health. Because this was the challenges that we faced, that we realized that our healthcare system is broken. We also realized that we were not pushing programs to have an education foundation for nurses, period, for registered nurses. Somehow that got lost along the way at the University of Guam, but now it's back, right? And so I understand the complexity of having just in my mind to add $5 million for the BPT to supplement or to assist in this measure for the nurses. And with all of this money that is up here unaccounted for, to include that we're going to receive an infrastructure supplement as well. I would have to say that I support this measure. So, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Nelson. Does any other colleague would like to speak? I'm looking across. I see no one else. I'd ask Senator Clint.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also rise in support of the amendment. I think it's a small increase, especially considering that the difference between BBMR's number and OFB's number is about 40 million, right, for business privilege tax. This amendment is just seeking a $5 million increase, which is a lot smaller than that $40 million increase that is BBMR's tracking for business privilege taxes. So I don't think it's that huge of a leap. I still think it's very conservative. In fact, I actually think we should go with BBMR's number of 280. But I'll save that for another amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Does any other colleague would like to speak to that? Senator Moylan, did you? No? I don't see anybody else's hand. I'd ask Senator Torres to please close on her amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I started out by talking about how I thought that there was a gap, that this provision was not made in the Budget Act on its plain appropriation. I mean, what we're talking about is $4.4 million for Guam Memorial Hospital Authority. I'm sorry, 4.4 million in total. 1,252,180 for GMH, 488,521 for Guam Behavioral Health, 1,753,490 for Department of Public Health and Social Services, $871,197 for GDOE. This $4.4 million represents less than 1% of our budget. We can claim that things can be absorbed, but perhaps as we get through these different line item categories, I will in fact try to make an amendment to specifically appropriate those numbers to be sure that we are not chancing that it can or cannot be absorbed. And that's the whole point of wanting to make sure that this money is there. I just believe at this point, Mr. Chair, notwithstanding what's been said in opposition or in general about the concept of raising BPT by $5 million, a very modest $5 million, when right now we're tracking $239 million in collections for BPT. If we cannot secure this after a devastating pandemic and a chronic nursing shortage, then I really fear that this body doesn't have a budget problem. It has a priority problem. The priority, in my opinion, is healthcare and all those first-line providers that are addressing a healthcare crisis right now. I ask for your support. You know, right now, this Delta variant is affecting our children. You see the numbers rising in GDOE. It's not getting better for our nurses. Let's at least commit to funding, as the governor requested, that we provide for it in the budget specifically to carry on what she was able to do in fiscal year 21. But in 22, let's just make sure that if anything, that we take care of those that we most need to help take care of us. And right now, our school kids. Right now. That's all I ask, very modest. And if not, then if this amendment should not pass, then let's look at specifically appropriating and carving out in each division how we're going to do that. Because I just don't see how it can be done. But I can see how it can be done this way through the BPT, because the assumption of being able to collect that $5 million is a very viable assumption. It's hardly a risk. $5 million out of close to $1 billion budget. So I ask for your support most sincerely, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Torres. There is an objection, so on the motion to amend on line 23, page 3, through line 21, page 4. All in favor, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Motion fails. We will now proceed to the next amendment. Next amendment, Speaker Turley, you have, you have an amendment, ma'am. Trying to see which one. I think it's the line 1 through 22, page 3 to 4, and then followed by line 22 to page 4. But we'll begin with your line 1 through 22. I beg your pardon, Senator Tello? On the title, it says it's SB 55 TMTL 1-22 P4.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, are these amendments in some sense of order so we're not having to look for them on our computer here?
I would suggest
What
it's supposed to be
sequence are
in
they in?
page order by page. They're ordered by page number.
It's ordered by page, but if you want, I can have the clerks to
It would be helpful. I mean, if we're
Reorganize it
going
so
to do
as
it
you're
in
looking at
page,
going
then
down.
put the respective order of the sponsor according to that page,
All right.
so we're not looking
Why don't we
for it.
take they asked for a 5-minute recess.
I'm
They're
good
gonna
with that.
put it in order so we just flow, and I agree with you. I was looking for it too while I
I mean,
was
we
saying
have
that.
to use reading glasses, come on.
Thank you. We have a
Makes us a
5-minute
little
recess
slower.
while they reorganize it. Thank you. is called to order. We'll now proceed with, but before we proceed to Speaker's amendment. Colleagues, if you go to your, where you're listing of the amendments, click on name, and then it will put it in sequence. It'll number it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I just did that just now, and that's, otherwise, if you leave it as it is, it's still mixed up. Click on name, and it gives you the sequence, and it's numbered for example, 1 SB 55 MCT L23 P3, and it keeps going down. And we'll move now to the second one, which is number 2 SB 55 TMT L1 -21 P34 COTW PDF. All right, we will now proceed to Speaker Terlai on her amendment. Madam Speaker.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. And everyone got the number of that? Right. All right, so it's the First Amendment. First, I want to begin by commending OFB for the work that they've done, and of course you, Mr. Chair, the estimates in this unprecedented conditions that we are facing, and that you have kept us in this budget close to agency and BBMR requests, and you've been conservative in your projections, and I appreciate that. And every year I am one of those who, advocates for conservative projections. But as you will note in my amendment, this amendment will raise the BPT from $238 million to $280 million. It puts the entire additional $42 million towards our provision for tax refunds, so that our provision will go from $74 million to $112 million. This will allow for a little bit more cash on top of the federal reimbursements for earned income tax credit and child tax credits, and covers all other taxpayers who don't qualify for either of those earned income tax credits or child tax credits. BBMR asked several days ago that we put $12 million more towards the $74 million for tax provisions in the current bill to account for those other taxpayers. I'm saying, let's put even more than that for tax provisions. And what this will do is it will allow the government of Guam to pay tax refunds faster and to catch up with what is overdue. Right now, we owe $23 million in processed returns awaiting payment for 2020 and other previous years, according to the most recent printed on August 2nd statement from the Department of Revenue and Taxation. That $23 million represents 7,200 processed returns. There are also 6,800 returns from 2020 that have not been processed. So, I'm just a layperson, but I'm estimating it would be close to that $20 million that's owed for the 7,200 other returns. If we put more cash up front in our tax provision, in addition to the federal reimbursements for EITC and CTC, we have the unique opportunity to catch up on all our tax refunds and pay them in the fastest time ever. Perhaps 6 to 8 weeks, as I've seen in other jurisdictions, and those are the longer time periods. As you know, there are many that can pay these refunds much, much quicker than that. We can take this unique opportunity because of the BBMR, BPT estimates, and the ARP, or the American Rescue Plan, and other federal aids, such as the infrastructure plans, that not even passed yet, but pretty much, everybody's guessing that those are for sure going to be coming. This ARP, the availability of the ARP funds this year allows us the ability to side with taxpayers and go all out. No need to protect these amounts for agencies or special hidden spending. So again, the amendment is to raise the BPT to 280. Current BBMR tracking of BPT for FY21 is 285. This is with practically zero tourism all year, businesses only operating at 50% from October 2020 to April 2021, and only 75% from April 2021 to July 2021. We only opened 100% in July, and bars were closed until February altogether. So with an open economy and even slightly more tourism than our current year, the BPT could be better than last year. So the substitute bill in front of us today estimated CTC to be 31.5 million and ACTC, or additional child tax credits, to be 23.4 million, which is about 55 million total. Based on the recent announcement, we will be getting 93 million, or approximately. That's an additional 38 million from what's estimated, and that's good news. It's at least 38 million more circulating in the economy in the next fiscal year. Of course, it's not as much as PUA, but this additional 38 million, plus the additional 27 million in SNAP funds, plus Guam's spending of a portion of the $600 million on direct assistance to our economy through ARP funds, especially if we use those in direct aid, such as in the RISE, 30 million in RISE payments, 30 million for direct small business payroll support programs, $500 debit cards for tourists, other direct assistance programs that gets this money circulating in the economy. Also, as Mr. Howes pointed out, and most of my colleagues, I am very confident, have been following these things, that there are other federal aid that we are not counting here, but we can anticipate. And as he pointed out, that we could be more optimistic in the upcoming year than in the current year, with all the closures that this current year has seen. Again, in light of the rise, I call it a fiasco really at this point, this is one way we, the legislature, can ensure the money is going to get into the hands of those who need it. With PUA ending, we need to do everything we can to push more money out into the economy as quickly as we can, especially for our most vulnerable populations. If we can pay the CTC, EITC, and other tax refunds and circulate the 117 million in addition to other direct assistance programs, it will help working families. It will keep working families working. Otherwise, if we go with the more conservative BPT revenue estimate, but collect more than that amount and get excess BPT, we have no control over those funds. We have experienced this before with trying to use excess revenues for the hospital. We tried and were not able to accomplish the transferring of excess revenues and putting those into the hands of the hospital. Over the last 5 years, the legislature has been extremely conservative, and because of that, all of the surpluses have been used to pay for other things like deficit, but when we ask them to specify exactly which liabilities were paid off, it's very unclear. So the legislature, we helped, and the people of Guam helped to accrue $105 million in surpluses over 5 years, and all of that was spent without legislative oversight at the governor's full discretion. Some of my colleagues have said that we can just go back and adjust the budget several times during the year. I don't think I've seen that happen, where we've adjusted the budget because of increased revenues. We have increased revenues right now that we're looking at in FY21. And it's very difficult to catch the timing correctly when you're doing this later on in the year to catch, what will be deemed excess. That's what happened with the hospital. So while it may be possible to come back in and, pass a bill, adjust the budget, it would require, passing a new budget bill, getting it signed by the governor. And I think that's a feat easier said than done. And what I am proposing is that we lock up that potential excess now for refunds and not wait to ask the governor if we can prioritize it later for refunds. We make it very clear that that is our priority. First and foremost, just as the law says, that whatever we set aside for tax refunds is deposited when the taxes are paid to the government. I know there's uncertainty of whether we will actually reach this BPT amount, but by passing this amendment, we lock any additional BPT so that it goes only towards refunds. This amendment does not change our bottom line expenditures and does not increase the spending already set forth in the bill. It forces the government to prioritize taxpayers above all else, put money into their hands, and let the cash circulate in the economy. And this year, we can do this, despite the administration hiding their plans for the ARP, and without harm to critical services of the government, and without allowing pet project spending in any other area. So I humbly ask for my colleagues to consider this with open minds and to please help me in this effort, and I would appreciate your support.
Thank you, Speaker. Does any of my colleagues, Senator Duenas?
Mr. Chairman. I think going back to 2010 and the final realization that we should no longer, 2011, I guess, we should no longer finance government revenues on the backs of our taxpayers. We made right by ensuring that we could finally erase that deficit, and subsequently there was a court order that mandates the payment 6 months after the audited refund requirement. Tax refunds is one of the most popular things we could ever talk about. Every time, whether it's 2 million, 4 million, 10 million, 15 million, there's a press release. I want to also thank all of the panel members that came down to represent the preparation of this budget. But Mr. Chairman, I want to hearken to probably the highlight of what it means to pay tax refunds and the obligations in our budget. I trust Daphne Shimizu. I think she's one of the shining stars in this administration. She made it very clear to us, Mr. Chairman, as she sat there. She marshals every resource at Rev and Tax to make sure, whether it's this ACTC, CTC, whatever monies are coming in, to first of all get those programs stood up, get the federal government to agree with the expenditure plan, get that money out there. And also that she is extremely cognizant and under her watch will never let the government of Guam default on the court order. Mr. Chairman, I trust and believe OFB's numbers. I trust and believe that as it was enumerated in the provisions for tax refunds, there is adequate resources to include the reimbursement for the first time in the history of Guam of $55 million in EITC. My good colleague, the mover of this amendment, said that this is going to be lockboxed. We're going to raise BPT by $41 million. This is going to be lockboxed for tax refunds. Mr. Chairman, with transfer authority and everything else when we give this money, I just don't believe that that's true. That's why we are guarding this BPT with our life under this conservative number. Mr. Carlson was clear when he indicated, when we asked him repeatedly, how have you been spending the revenue? First of all, under your fiscal control, and you've been bringing in money, how have you been using that resource without coming down here? So we have a deficit. I agree that we haven't been given the list of what's been paid off, but it's clear to the current BBMR director that as long as a deficit exists, they have the authority to spend that money. Right now, the audited deficit, Mr. Chairman, is barely over $1 million. We have a provision in the end of this budget that already says that the administration has to come down and work with us to raise appropriations for the expenditures of money. And I'm sure that provision is clear without a deficit. With a deficit, they've got the cover to spend the money. We got bills, we're paying bills. Without a deficit, I don't believe that exists, Mr. Chairman. Having said that, we could double down on this. I believe there probably is another amendment that's coming up that actually will set that up without having to raise the revenue. Our language that this legislature passes should be just as durable as a number, but we're much more secure by not irresponsibly raising the BPT in these uncertain times. We only need to read. I know that there's been a lot of representations of optimism, and I'm an optimistic person myself. I think I'm going to win the Derby this weekend, the fishing derby. But you know what? You also have to benchmark that against 3 articles in the media today. I think the Post got it right. They recognize that this legislature is doing the right thing by being conservative. And they laid out all the preconditions of PUA ending, FPUC ending. Our chairman of the Chamber of Commerce, Christine Berletto, writes a letter today. Businesses are struggling under uncertainty. There's an article today, Mr. Chairman. I was surprised because I guess it took until tomorrow. The governor is going to implement restrictions starting tomorrow. I hope she doesn't cancel the Derby. But restrictions are coming. And it's exactly what the chairwoman of the Chamber of Commerce said. Uncertainty is driving these businesses to have to contemplate their future. We know where our bread is buttered. It's businesses. BPT. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Burns said, you can put $75 million in there, you can put $300 million in the category for tax refunds. It's all about show me the money. Where's the cash? OFB has front-loaded the $74 million that's required here, and we've talked about it, and it was even discussed while the panel was here, that they have adequate funding as long as cash is available to roll those tax refunds out. And in anticipation subsequently to that, to the reimbursements coming in, it will keep that train running. But more than that, Mr. Chairman, it's the law. I believe if we put $1 in that fund, they wouldn't be able to break the law. I mean, that would be irresponsible of us, but I'm just saying they have to follow the law. They have that mandate by court order. Now, yes, I want to put the money in the hands of our people. There's no question about that. But let's also hearken back to the history, Mr. Chairman. Revenue Tax does everything that it can, and they're a great bunch of folks, but they can only do so much in terms of processing. Yes, we have a backlog now. It's kind of interesting because we're tracking 289, but we have a backlog. I just don't think that number is going to be realized, Mr. Chairman, and I just don't think we should do this under the guise of because we're going to lockbox it for tax refunds. I know that there's been mention that maybe not in recent years, but I'm sure maybe my good colleague, if she chooses to speak on this amendment, does remember a time when there was a time when government was flush with cash. There was a time when we actually gave people a $1,000 rebate. I would imagine during those times there might have had to be a revisiting to raise revenues in order to be able to. It's not impossible. It's not impossible. So, Mr. Chairman, for that reason, I just think that I don't think it's prudent for this body, albeit as well-intentioned, and as has been proffered by the author, for us to raise BPT and to raise the revenues by $41 million. So for that reason, Mr. Chairman, I object to this amendment.
Thank you, Senator Duenas. Does anyone else like to speak to the amendment? Looking across the floor. Senator Tello.
Sidus Mosi, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity to speak on this amendment. And I totally support the intent of what we're trying to accomplish here in this amendment and what it does. And actually, Mr. Chair, when I was looking at the numbers here from the gross provisions of tax refund payment to 183, while maintaining the Healthcare Center of Excellence and the new Department of Correction facility at $5 million, it actually, to me, became out like balanced. Because as I was looking at this, I was thinking in my head, there's like this $40 million that's missing, and that's basically the equivalent of the Healthcare Excellence and the Department of Correction facility. I talked with OFB, went back and forth on this, and I'm still not satisfied with it. I understand what they were doing, but it is a bit confusing. But I do have a question for the author of this amendment. And if she should yield, please. May I continue?
Please state
Okay,
your
thank you.
questions, and then I'll ask her if she yields to the question.
Okay,
Thank you.
so my question would be, if we were to strike out the 145, where it says gross provisions for tax refund payments, strike out the 145, maintain the 183,529,459, and take out the Healthcare of Excellence, that's in parentheses, and the Department of Correction facilities, and take that out, could we still maintain those tax refunds going straight to the trust? In other words, take out those two provisions, which is a total of 40 million.
Madam Speaker, would you like to answer that, or would you like the OFB to answer that? Your call.
By the way, this would be without raising the BPT, without the other changes, only to reflect where it says tax refund payments. It would still maintain at 112-623-09. Everything would be in place, but just taking out the Healthcare of Excellence and the new Department of Correction facility at 40 million and maintaining those numbers that are proposed, 183 for tax fund payments, and toward the end where it says general fund provisions for tax refund payments. And I bring this up, Mr. Chair, because the question I asked too was, well, let me allow the speaker
Yes,
to
just
yeah,
allow.
first. Yeah.
Madam Speaker, do you yield to the question?
I think I get what, I would yield, but I'm not sure I know exactly the answer, but I just want to say, yes, I see what you're saying, that if we do not set aside this 40 million, that, you know, whether according to this language that becomes available, I'm not sure. That I have to yield to OFB or take a recess to be sure. That's not the math that I did here.
All right, then what we'll do, Madam Speaker, is I'll ask OFB to respond, because he does have an answer to that question. It can be very simple. Mr. Guerrero, please respond to the question, and maybe Senator Tello can, if you want to repeat the question to make sure it's clear. Senator Tello, if you can just repeat the question one more time so that he understands exactly what you're asking.
Okay, we're at, well, I don't have the lines on here. Oh, there. We're on page 3, of course, line 13, where it says gross provisions of tax refund payments. The intention was to strike out the 145 and to incorporate 183, 529, 459. And then, so that's what would be set aside for tax refund payments, 183 instead of 145. And then at the bottom, it says the general fund provision for tax refund payments would actually be 112,623,099. Now, can we do this the same way without raising the BPT by just eliminating the Healthcare of Excellence and the Department of Correction of 40 million and give it to tax refunds? I'm looking at the speaker's amendment.
If you would just, they're looking at the formula?
Sure. You want to take 1 minute? So
Well,
they can-
I think he's ready.
okay.
He's ready. He would have to look at the formula
Sure.
screen so he can give you a very detailed answer.
Okay.
Mr. Guerrero?
So let me see if I got your question correct. You want to remove the 145 for the gross provision for tax refund and replace it with 183 million.
Right.
You want to go back down to the provision for tax refund payments and change the 74 to 112.6 million, correct?
And, yes, and
right.
by eliminating the
That-
healthcare, yeah.
I will, yeah. Then you want to go back and eliminate the 55, the 35, the 5 million.
No, not the 55,
You want
just the 35 for the Healthcare of Excellence Center, which everyone knows it's going to be a couple years before that comes into play, and then the new Department of Correction facilities at 5 million. So we eliminate those.
By
Mr.
doing that,
Chair-
if you remove the 55, I mean the 35 and the 5, you are changing the bottom line.
Which is 112.62.
No, no, that's provisional tax refunds. I'm talking the bottom line of the general fund.
Okay. On page what and line what, sir?
Stand by. Mr. Guerrero? Senator Tello? You're asking for them to tell you what would the difference be?
Yes.
Which will reflect, basically, it'll go all the way to a different page. So I think it'll end up giving you an answer of what you would find on page 7. Further down, it's further on in the budget. Just understand that anytime you make changes in the budget numbers, it has a domino effect, and it just keeps going. You know what I mean? It's multiplier effect. So if you're asking him, will it change? He just mentioned it will.
Yeah.
Okay, so you just need to answer what's on this page, Steve.
What it boils down to, Mr. Chair, is
Yes.
that instead of funding with EITC money, the hospital, which we've already had a meeting a couple days ago with the Army Corps of Engineers telling us it's going to take about 2 years for this to even come to fruition. I mean, even the planning stages is going to take about 2 years. As far as DOC is concerned, you know, we heard from them. They did have a plan, but they had a phase-in approach too with their plan, which I thought was excellent. At least they had a plan, right, coming in front of us. So if we were to just take this out off the board and utilize this funding for earned income tax credit instead of the $40 million to go to a project that we have yet to even, that's not going to start for a while, then, so my question is, if we did that, would that be able to increase the amount of tax refunds that are going to be set aside in the fund for the tax refund account?
Senator, to answer your question, it'd be difficult right now to keep the gross provision for tax refund payments at $183.5 million and keep the general provision for tax refunds after you subtract the earned income tax credit, the CTC, and additional tax credit. The 112 you cannot keep the 112. It will change. One of the two numbers must change, is what I'm trying to tell you. Because what you're asking me to do, if is it possible to keep both numbers the same without changing the bottom line? The answer is no.
But it can be done, right? We can direct this funding toward tax returns instead of, tax refunds, instead of appropriating it without increasing the BPT. I mean, if we didn't increase the BPT, we would have to take it from somewhere to give this additional $112 million for tax refunds, set aside for our people's money, to give back to them that they justly deserve. So by taking out the $40 million that's set aside from EITC and then incorporating that, I don't see how changing the BPT, it's going to affect changing the BPT. We can keep the BPT the same, but just take this $40 million and put it into tax refunds.
It's not as simple as that, Senator. Right now, if the 183 that you're asking to maintain, you would have to change that to 185 million.
Okay.
And then the provision for tax refunds in the bottom, you would still be 74.
Even if you took out the healthcare of excellence and the
Yes.
DOC, it would still be 74.
It would have to be 74.
Okay.
All you're doing is raising the gross amount.
Okay. Steve, I asked you earlier, because just for the listening audience, that we've got some funding that's coming our way that we normally have to pay out of the general fund. And that's earned income tax credit, and that's the CTC, child tax credit, and the additional child tax credit that's been added particularly because of COVID. That's not usual. That's just been added because of it. So we're getting a refund from the government, from the federal government. Actually, not a refund. They're now paying for these taxes. They're paying for it now. So that leaves us some funding that we can incorporate and put into paying, like the speaker said, what the intentions are. But I did ask you, how much money on that line 21, page 3, where it says 74,093,634. Is this the amount of money we're going to be paying out for income tax refunds, not including earned income tax, not including CTC, and not including ACT?
The answer is yes.
Okay, so how much do we normally pay out, the government of Guam normally pay out every year for income tax refunds? Not including the AC and that. How much do we normally do?
Information received from Department of Revenue Taxation, that amount varies every year. It can go as low as 130 million to as high as 165 million. We took the average, which is 145. In the
No,
budget,
Steve, wait. Just for clarity, I'm asking one question, and that question is, how much money does government of Guam usually pay for tax refund, income tax refund, not including the child tax credit or the CTC? How much a year does Gov Guam usually pay out in refunds?
again, it depends on how much every year the total tax is. So I
Okay.
told you it varies from 130 to as high as 165.
Okay, you
You're
told
asking
me-
me how much is the general fund portion of that. Again, it would vary. This year in the 22 budget, we are setting aside $74 million of general fund money. That, I would assume, is strictly for regular tax returns, not including EITC, not including CTC, and additional child tax credit.
You told me that usually government Guam pays out $30 to $40 million in income tax refunds, not including the CTC and the EITC. It's usually 30 to 40 million in income tax refunds. And because now the federal government is now covering CTC, ACT, and EITC, Gov Guam is now going to shoulder out of the general fund close to $40 million in income tax refunds, right? Is that correct?
If it's a low year, it could be 40. If it's a high year, it could be 50. It could be 60. Senator, it varies every year depending on the total amount paid out.
And your assessment this year is saying that it's going to be about $74 million because this amount here, $74 million, after all this is taken out, is anticipated to pay out income tax refunds, not including EITC and all that, right?
Senator, the 74 million was derived from the total of 145 we anticipate to pay out in tax refunds. 74 is the general fund portion. The balance
General
of
fund
74
portion. There.
and 145 is EITC, CTC, and additional
Right.
child tax credit.
Steve, I understand that the 145 is a cumulative of all income tax plus EITC, plus CTC, plus ATC. That's 145.
That's correct.
But what I'm trying to get to is how much do we pay out usually a year, which you said is around 40 to 50, it all depends on income tax, because that's all the government of Guam is going to be obligated, because the federal government is already covering all those other taxes, tax refunds on the CTC.
But
So
you're-
technically, we're only going to be issuing out in income tax payments, maybe 40 to 50 million, all depends. So my question to you is, you came up with 74 million. Is that 74 anticipated to pay out only income tax refunds? Only income tax, the bottom line where it says payments.
Senator, the answer is yes, because
Okay,
I just told you that
that's
is the
my
difference
question.
of the 145, which is going to be covered by federal reimbursement monies.
Okay.
You're
Yes.
absolutely correct.
Okay.
Point
so
of
that's-
information, is that with 55 million of
Stand
the
by.
earned income tax credit or 15 million only?
My
Yes,
colleagues.
no, actually, that's a good question.
Stand by. My colleagues, let me just have Steve, we need to go back to the basic math so you understand how it works. 74 million is identified. Picture that. That's general fund. That's our money. We used to put out on budget 125. The other 20 million was ATC, which at the end of the year were
CTC.
reimbursed by the federal government. Okay, so pause there. That's why it's 125.
Right.
Now, out of the federal law that was passed and signed by President Biden,
Right.
They're paying us now to pay the federal mandate, which is about 70 to 80 million dollars. That's why it's 74. That we, the people of Guam, will have to contribute to pay for tax refund. When you say tax refund, it could be EIT, whatever it is,
No,
we
but-
pay it. And then the EITC is reimbursed. Part of that, we already got the advance
Point
of
of order.
CTC. So if you want any further clarity, he can give you
Mr.
that.
Chair, thank you so much for that, Mr. Chair, but he answered the question. And the question is, the payment of 74 million is only, it's coming from the general fund, it's only to pay income tax refunds, right? Okay, that was my question. So if we're looking between 50 to 60 million to pay out income tax refunds, I think, I'm just seeing that the change here for 112, if we just take out the Healthcare of Excellence and Department of Correction and incorporate into that, then there's even more sufficient funding there available to pay out. But yeah,
So-
I just wanted to make that analogy, Mr. Chair, that's all.
Senator Tello, just understand, when you make that analogy, you're basically saying, do not reserve for GMH and
Mr. Chair,
DOC.
point of order.
Just want to make sure, okay?
Point of order.
Madam Speaker, do you have any questions you have?
Point of order, if we're going to debate.
Right, okay. So that was my question to the Speaker. OFB answered, she did the best she could. OFB answered my question with regards to earned income tax. That's all that we're playing here. And then I asked about eliminating the hospital, the Healthcare of Excellence. As I mentioned, that won't be for another 2 years, and then the Department of Correction. And then incorporating that into the additional taxes so that we can pay out to our people, ahead of time, or even ahead of time. But
Understood.
So that, I was wondering if we can do that, and it sounds like we can do it, but I do want to also bring to light that, my colleague, a good colleague from Sinahanya also mentioned, about an order, a court order requiring the administration to ensure that funds are set aside. And there's actually particularly a law that governs over that. And I was part of the administration, I was part of the legislature when the administration didn't put aside that $10 million for the hospital that the 35th Guam legislature had done. And by the time the next year came, it still wasn't done. And I think, Mr. Chair, we can kind of correct that for any excess revenue because of the amendment that I'm going to proffer. It kind of strengthens in the budget bill about the governor using any excess revenue, and that it goes into a lockbox, and placed in there, because I do understand the concerns, and we went through that in the 35th, where we set aside this money to help the hospital. And I think there was another funding that was set aside, the cancer care, Mr. Chair. You remember that? Any excess revenue goes to Cancer Care Coalition. That wasn't come to fruition. So I understand the concern, that the good speaker is proffering here, but I think we can also find a way to make an amendment to actually put more money into the income tax refund. And then maybe later on look at helping the hospital and DOC. Once we get on our feet, once we are up to date with being able to, if somebody files a tax return on a Monday, 1 week later, they get their tax refund. That's the way it should be. They do it in the mainland. Why can't we do it here on Guam? It's really quick. The other concern too, Mr. Chair, is like the realignment. I also have an amendment. Actually, I proffered legislation regarding the realignment, and I also incorporate that as an amendment into the bill that, oversees the governor's spending for ARP funding. So,
Senator Tello, let's just finish up on our amendment,
okay,
then
thank
we
you,
move
Mr.
on.
Chair, for indulging me on this, and I just wanted to make these comments. I appreciate the time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Does any other colleague would like to speak to the amendment of the Speaker Chulai? There are none. Senator, ooh, Senator Clint, you wanted to speak? Please.
Are we speaking on the Terlahi amendment?
That's correct.
Just making sure. All right, I rise in support of Speaker Terlahi's amendment for the same reasons that I mentioned before. I do commend OFB. I know that OFB and its director are very careful with how they produce revenue projections and typically are very, very conservative, which I like. And I do think they did a good job with the budget and putting together very conservative figures. However, I think in light of all this ARP money that GovGuam will be receiving and the fact that ARP money can be used to offset any losses in revenues due to the pandemic, that I think it's a safe bet to increase BPT projections, because in the event that BPT doesn't meet projected revenue collections, it can be supplemented by the ARP funds. And in fact, the governor has said that on the record in the media, in some interviews. She's quoted as saying that she would absolutely use ARP to make up for any lost revenues or revenue shortfalls. So that's why I'm in support of increasing the BPT amount. And I do think it's a good idea to put it towards tax refunds. I also do believe that there's enough in here for tax refunds already. However, I do think any more that we can throw to it would ensure that tax refunds are paid quickly, and that if there's more than enough for tax refunds, then it can go towards other uses later on if we find out that there's no more need for it for tax refunds. But ultimately, I support the amendment, and I ask my colleagues to support it as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Clint. I saw Senator Brown. Did you want to speak on this, or Senator? You, the Senator. Senator Ada, you first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to my colleagues. Mr. Guerrero, your 235 number, are you still firm on that?
Are you referring to the 238 BPT?
Yes, sorry, the 238, I'm
Okay.
sorry, yes.
Senator, when we came up with this number, we took everything into consideration. We went to the extreme and even assumed that even though PUA is not going to be realized and being paid out starting October 1st, in order for us to get even higher than 238, we were assuming that the loss in PUA would have to be replaced at least up to 90% to get back up to the 238. We also considered tourists. You know, we went to the highest. We had a range between 70,000 and 130,000 tourists. We could have stuck to 70. We could have stuck to 110. But we went with the 130, being very optimistic. Totally against what GBB was even saying, that, you know, being 130 is very optimistic. But we went and we supported that. So that's what the 230 is based on. It wasn't the bare bones amount that we came up with originally. It was actually something that I feel that is very optimistic, but being very reasonable at the same time. So as of today, despite what has been brought up, you know, part of that 230 also, we kind of like provided room for the unexpected, the unknowns, and it's something just like this. The 27 million that we're talking about, 5% of 28 million is $1.3 million. Okay, so, gosh, I can't put my money that we're going to get $1.3 million just because somebody tells me we got an increase of $27 million. Then you tell me 50, you tell me 100, then I might think. But we're losing 36 million overnight in PUA. How are we going to make that up? I mean, all the other activity that was mentioned, I agree. But those military contracts, they've been around for years. And I've been asking people, economists, accountants, how does that relate into government revenues? I haven't seen a drastic increase in government revenues as a result of $200, $300, $400 million worth of federal contracts. Nothing. One thing I can attribute to increase in federal activities is maybe the Manpower Development Fund, because that is a one-to-one. We got an H-2B worker coming in, we know that's $2,000 in the bank, easy. But you're talking about a maximum of $4 million, $7 million for the Manpower Development Fund compared to $500 million in military contracts. I need to see the correlation before I can even do anything else. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Guerrero. Thank you. You know, Mr. Chair, Mr. Guerrero has stated once again on his numbers. And his numbers have been firm. We've been in the committee hall for 5-6 days now. And since day one, he has stuck to those numbers. Now, perhaps maybe had the administration had been open with us on the ARP funding, maybe I would have been able to say, you know what, maybe yes, we can look at maybe adjusting it. Perhaps, maybe. But all we got from the administration, from the director of DOA, was they can't talk about it. They're not sure. You know, we can trust what they say, but it also needs to be verified. Are we willing to gamble the future of our island with the uncertainty that looms over us? Imagine what we went through with the coronavirus 19. We don't know what the certainty of this Delta variant is, or that Lambda variant that's coming out of the Philippines. What would that affect on the workforce coming to Guam? There are so many uncertainties at this point in time. Just like the administration has their fiscal team, we have ours, OFB, who has gone day and night compiling this budget, working the numbers. Their team has gone out there and to ensure that this is something that we can come into this body and work with. We adjust the revenues up to 280, 285, and fall short. Do we have the money to cover it? Absolutely not. We don't have $600 million in our back pocket waiting to be spent. I see the uncertainties of our people's future. Gas prices increase. Minimum wage is going up in the next couple of weeks. How many businesses are going to be able to sustain staying open, increase in minimum wage, but no customers coming in because pool has run out? People are not going out to spend. Once again, we put the burden on the back of our people, and we can't do that. As much as we want to fund everything that we can under the sun, Mr. Guerrero has said time and time again, all warm bodies are funded. Sometimes we just need to take a step back and just look at things holistically, you know. Let's take a look at the big picture. Is there something I would like to fund? Absolutely. But you know what? It's not the time. Mr. Guerrero and the OFB team has led this legislature in the last term and kept at bay with his numbers. And what had happened? It panned out. And that was a good year last time. That was a good year. So I just ask my colleagues to please consider what can happen if we adjust revenues. our own OFB team here. This is our body, our team that has guided us. Because if we're just going to go with what the administration says and wants, then I don't think we need our OFB team. But again, thank you, Mr. Director, for everything that you've done with the team, and Mr. Chair. Thank you.
All right, colleagues. Thank you, Senator Atta. Anyone else on the Tulahi amendment? Senator Brown, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I certainly understand the position the Speaker is taking with regards to wanting to ensure that tax refunds are paid. Certainly, the administration has taken credit for their ability this year to pay out tax refunds at a faster rate, as they said, than anyone else or any administration prior to them. And I think that's great. Certainly, those of us in the community that are expecting and receiving our tax refunds are happy to finally get it, because the whole process before used to be very political. I mean, before you had to have a death in the family to even get consideration to get tax refunds paid, because they weren't being paid in a timely fashion. So there's no argument there in our desire of wanting to see that. What I'm not comfortable with is raising these numbers. And we're not raising them by 1,000 here or 1,000 there. We're raising them by millions, substantial amounts, almost $82+ million. And again, publicly, I don't know what the administration has said privately. I don't know if they've engaged with any of our other colleagues here in the legislature. I've not engaged with them. So all I have, and all the people of Guam have, is the information they provided publicly coming before us over these many days here in the Guam Legislature. And when it comes to, obviously, to talking about the ARP funds, my gosh, the silence is deafening. They would take no position with regards to what and how the governor's going to proceed or what her priorities are to fund for that, other than the few things they've already acknowledged that have been paid out with ARP funds. And I continue to reiterate, this is a time to be careful. This is a time to be cautious. Because I'll tell you, I've been through many budgets. I've been through many budgets in my time. And that's when the economy, we assume, was all operating. We didn't have the current situation that we have with thousands of our people to this level of being unemployed, or the number of businesses. Now, while some have thrived, some businesses obviously have profited from this pandemic. Some have profited in the millions. They must be doing very well. But there are many others, a lot of small businesses out there that have suffered substantially. Their employees that have worked for them have suffered, particularly those in the tourism industry. Many of us know people in the industry. There's some I would meet at a regular coffee shop and thought they just worked there and go down and have dinner at one of our hotels, and that the evening they're there working there, just sometimes 2 or 3 jobs just to make a living, to make a comfortable living. I don't know how you're comfortable when you're working 2 or 3 jobs a day. That's a lot. That's a lot to carry. I mean, if the concern is, and I can understand the concern is wondering, is the administration playing with money that never gets put in accounts? How do we lockbox that to ensure that what is appropriate is actually what gets spent in this government, and that money that is spent is only money that's authorized? I've been on both sides of the aisles. Many of us probably here have worked on both sides in the administration and the legislature. And I think we recognize and respect the respective authority and responsibility of both branches of government, because I've not worked in the judiciary. But our job is to appropriate and authorize the budget for the government. And I agree with my other colleague here, Senator Atta, who just spoke quite eloquently with regards to the challenges and the reality of where we're at. We live in a subsidized economy by the federal government right now. And fortunately, it has gotten us through this past year and a half. But what about next year? What about the next few months? I mean, for me, this is a time we should be careful, because I'm sorry, as I go down through Tumon and I look at the inactivity there And yes, granted, we've had, the military that have been here for exercises, and yes, we're getting a trickle back of some tourists. I mean, if this had happened at any other time, we would just be totally shocked. I mean, we have typhoons, we're closed for a few days, a week or two, and then the island's back to some sense of normalcy once power and water is restored and we do debris cleanup. But this is a major impact for such a significant period of time. And for us, all of a sudden now, to want to increase these revenue numbers so that we can address the paying back tax refunds. If I recall, wasn't there a court case that ordered the government of Guam to pay tax refunds within a 6-month period of filing? Did we forget that? I don't think this is optional anymore, even though I know there's such desire to take credit for the expediency of paying out these tax refunds, but aren't they supposed to be setting aside a percentage of that revenue coming in to do exactly that? And yet we're still trying to find where we're going to pay back tax refunds as if that's a total separate entity disconnected from the revenue base coming in. I understand where the speaker is coming from, and I otherwise, under other circumstances, would be very supportive of this. But the mechanism of doing that to prevent funds from being expended that otherwise were never authorized by this legislature, I can't see the logic in raising the revenue base, in increasing it by this substantial amount in order to justify doing and paying the tax refunds. So with that, unfortunately, and even though I understand what the speaker is attempting to do here, and I appreciate that effort on her part, but I just can't justify at this critical juncture, as we're making these decisions, to increase that amount, especially substantial. We're not even talking, $1 million here, $1 million there. We're talking a substantial amount of increase to address this issue. And so with that, unfortunately, Mr. Chairman, I have to vote against this amendment. Thank you very much for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you. Anyone else on the Terlahi amendment? No one else on the Terlahi amendment? Speaker Terlahi, you may close.
Thank you. I want to thank my colleagues for all their comments on this amendment. And again, ask you to just please consider this with open minds. I know, even I have been one of the most strongest proponents of not raising any revenues in these budget discussions over all these years. I'm one of the more conservative revenue, senators. So I totally get that. But we are in an unprecedented time, looking for unprecedented ways of making an impact in people's lives, which I believe is greatly needed today. And I don't believe that our current budget, despite it being balanced and despite it being conservative and despite it covering the agencies as they have requested, that we are doing all we can for those families and individuals who are waiting for their money back from the government of Guam. And last year, in the midst, and this is not about me being on the side of the administration. I mean, actually, I think that's entertaining. But, so I'm saying, people, it's either we as a legislature are going to be on the side of the people of Guam when we have an opportunity. That's really it. So please, last year, in the midst of the shutdowns, in the midst of the pandemic, we were in here trying to do a budget by Zoom, most of it, and our OFB estimated $304 million in BPT, which is higher than what I am proposing today for FY2022. It's it's tracking, we are tracking now 19.6 million in excess revenues, which we, as a legislature, did not dictate how it would be spent. Yes, we put in a provision in the last budget. We put in so many provisions over the years trying to control that money at the end of the year when the excess is declared. But I'm telling you, it is difficult to control it at that time. There's all kinds of, you've seen it, most of you have served in different administrations, and you've seen how the semantics, how the loopholes, it's very difficult for the legislature later on to try to control that. I'm not going to give up on that. I'll support that, but I'm saying it's so much more difficult, and you're not going to get the full amount like we can if we do it in advance. And when we talk about putting the burden on the backs of our people, that is what we do when we fund government first and people last. And these are refunds. This is not a handout to them. It's their refunds or their credits that they are entitled to. That's what it is. It's not a special project of mine. It's ours. And to pay refunds, we need cash. The way to put the cash in immediately, after all we've been through, we can't even get the ARP funds that are sitting in a bank out to the people's hands through the rise. So I'm proposing another way. We get this out to them through their refunds by us doing what we can do, and that is allocating more towards tax refunds. Now, not later, now. I am not satisfied with the status quo. You have heard me praise, Director Shimizu over and over. She is processing refunds faster than we've seen them processed. It's fantastic. It's great. And yes, we have a court order that has mandated that we pay refunds in 6 months of the filing deadline, not 6 months from when you file in January. Most of these people who want their EITC credits are filing in January. The law doesn't mandate that they're paid within 6 months of that. They're paid within 6 months of the filing date, which is normally April. So that means the deadline is October. And we have been successful. We've seen it. We've seen this administration able to get some of these refunds out faster. And I am applauding that, and I will always applaud that. But I say, we as a legislature, can we do better? Absolutely. Should that be our standard, 6 months from the filing deadline? Heck no. Not when the average in every state is 6 to 8 weeks. California pays it, if you file electronically, 3 weeks. If you file paper, 3 months. The IRS pays almost 9 out of 10 before COVID in 21 days. And I think they are competent, and they have proven they can process these things. So why would we allow 23 million to sit around and not get paid? It's processed, it's their money. I am trying, yes, it's unusual, and yes, it's a little bit of a gamble, because we can't predict anything, but I think if we've learned anything from now, we can't predict anything. But we can do our best to hand out the money that's not ours, most especially. I'm trying, of course. This is unique. Like I said, we're in unique circumstances, and I'm trying to do something to get together with all of you and do this outside the box. I want to truly influence faster payments of refunds, faster. Faster. I want to catch up with all those prior years that are processed, not disputed, processed and waiting, 23 million. And I think we can do that. And if there's any year that we are going to do that, it is this year, because we can do that without affecting any of the projects in this bill, without affecting any of the government agencies that we've asked to operate on, very lean budgets this year. We're not affecting them. What we're affecting is, estimates. And whether we're on somebody's team or not, there are no teams here, I hope, except for we are for the people or we are not. I'm not willing to sit around. If we can pay them faster, if we can lock it up, pay it faster, I don't want to sit around and wait to the end of the fiscal year and then try all of the legal maneuvering that we can to get them to prioritize refunds over everything else that they have discretion to pay, or to bank that the excess revenues that we're tracking are even going to be there at the end of the year if they're using it, and we confirmed this, they're able to use it now. So I'm just saying it's worth a try. I don't want to lose this opportunity. It's a very unique opportunity. I think we can catch up in 1 year. We can put, we're being told we can't control ARP funds, but we can control this. And if it comes in, the benefit's going to go to taxpayers. If it doesn't come in, it is not going to harm any agency, any critical services. It's not. If it doesn't come in, this BPT that you're afraid to gamble on, if it doesn't come in, please think about what would we lose? We would only lose the ability to pay more refunds. We would be back to square one, exactly what our budget says right now. And that's why I'm imploring you that there's no harm. We're going to, we are allocating money out of the 55 reimbursement that we are expecting for EITC. And I'm not trying to affect that. If that can work, we'll try it. But what I'm saying is if we can get additional BPT and allocate that as well towards refunds, then it's a win-win-win-win-win-win-win all around. And it's not going to hurt anyone. It's not going to hurt any agency's critical services. It's not going to hurt the people. They're currently sitting and waiting for their refunds. It would just give us a chance. It gives us a chance to do something good, to pay it faster, and pay them all. Pay all of the outstanding. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Speaker Terlai. There is an objection that was called earlier by Senator Duenas. Now we'll move to the motion to vote.
Roll call, Mr. Chairman.
Roll call. We need 3 calls for roll call. Senator Ada, Senator Moylan, and Senator Blas. Clerk, we will do a roll call.
Senator Ada. Senator Ada, nay. Senator Blas. Senator Blas, nay. Senator Brown. Senator Brown, nay. Senator Duenas. Senator Duenas, nay. Senator Moylan. Senator Moylan, nay. Vice Speaker Munya Barnes.
Mr. Chair, I move to excuse members not present for this vote.
Motion to excuse Vice Speaker Tina Munoz Barnes. Any objection? There being none, motion carries.
Vice Speaker Munoz Barnes excused. Senator Nelson. Senator Nelson, pass. Senator Perez. Senator Perez, aye. Senator Rogel. Senator Rogel, aye. Senator San Augustine. Senator San Augustine, nay. Senator Shelton. Senator Shelton, nay. Senator Tydegui. Senator Tydegui, pass. Senator Terlahi. Senator Terlahi, pass. Speaker Terlahi.
Ungern, por favor.
Speaker Terlahi, aye. Senator Torres. Senator Torres, nay. Senator Nelson. Senator Nelson, pass. Senator Tydegui. Senator Tydegui, nay. Senator Terlahi. Senator Terlahi, pass. Senator Nelson. Senator Nelson, nay. Senator Terlahi. Senator Terlahi, aye.
My colleagues, on the amendment, we have 4 ayes, 10 nays, and 1 excuse. Amendment fails. Madam Speaker, you have another amendment on the floor? You have the floor. My colleagues, it is SB 55 TMT L22 P4. It should be number 3 on your listing.
Oh, all right, minor, sorry, I apologize, minor. Okay. This one is just a special fund. Is that the one you're looking at, Mr. Chair? A long list of special funds?
That's correct, Madam
Okay.
Speaker.
Yeah, there were just a couple of special funds here where I'm proposing to change the amounts, and they're are all for the same reasons, pretty much. It looks like OFB accepted BBMR's prediction for these special funds back in February when they submitted their budget, but OFB's tracking is a little bit higher in these special funds. And so, because a lot of these special funds are for very particular purposes and they're like revolving, I would just like to up them to what we're already tracking, allow them to use whatever comes in for these very special purposes. And if I could just, so the first one is the Department of Public Health and Social Services Sanitary Inspection Revolving Fund. I think the name speaks for itself as to what the purpose of this fund is. It's only changing it from 115,000 some to 167,383, and that's based on the tracking. So if the money's available, they will get to spend up, a little more. If it's not available in the special fund, obviously, they're going to have to deal with that. They won't. But hopefully, we can give them everything available to them.
Go ahead and continue, please.
Okay. I was just going to do them. Do I need to do them one by one, or you want me to do them all together?
My colleagues, would you like, we just let the speaker just read it all, because you can
Okay.
all see it, and
Sure.
we'll move along. Thank
So
you, ma'am.
the next one, yes, it's to the Environmental Health Fund. Same reason. It's because these are for the inspections of businesses. Environmental health is they go out and they inspect your restaurants for you. They've always been underfunded. However, they're tracking just a little bit more this year, so I'd like to give it all to them instead of holding them back. So it's on number K, and it would change from 1.352 million to 1.390431. Yeah, line K. All right. Next one, the next special fund is on line V. For the Health Professional Licensing Office Revolving Fund. This revolving fund is all the licensing fees and penalties go into this fund. It gets allocated between the different licensing boards, health licensing boards. So of course, I just want to give them everything that they've got in there. Instead of 252, 296, 921. Next one is the Land Survey Revolving Fund. This is based on fees again. These are fees received by the Department of Land Management when you file documents. And they're expecting a little bit more, from 3.1 million to 3.418548. I'd like to give it to them because that's all the funds that they get is this revolving fund. So I would like to give them everything possible, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that. And again, same thing, Office of Vital Statistics Revolving Fund. It's a small fund, 236. Change that to 239,948 so that they can use everything available to them to upgrade their services there at Vital Statistics. If there's any questions on any of these funds, I'd be happy to expound on any of them. Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Does any of my colleagues would like to speak in reference to the special fund, or would you like the OFB to comment about it before you speak? Okay, I see Senator Brown pointing at for Steve. Mr. Guerrero, if you can speak. Right?
Yeah, I just want to ask his feedback on that. I mean,
All right.
Okay, based on the speaker's recommendation is that she's asking to up, I believe, 3 special fund accounts. The amounts that is reflected in the bill is the amounts that was reflected in the executive budget. The amount that she wants to increase it by is what we're tracking to date. My only concern about the tracking to date may include anomalies, may include one-time payments, which puts it over the normal. So those are the things that we need to consider when we look at the tracking. But the numbers that's reflected in the bill basically is what was requested in the executive budget. So we just followed that. We agreed with their number. We don't have a problem with it. So my only concern again with giving the tracking number is that you don't know what consists of the tracking amount to date. So it could be, like I said, one-time payments, something that's not a recurring thing every year. So we know we're not going to see it next year. But, you know what I mean? That's how we do it. When we take the tracking not only just 1 year, but maybe 4 or 5 years back, take the average and then use that. That's normally how we do it. We don't take the amount of 1 year and use that to project the following year. Because a lot of times, just like the general fund, we need to consider all accounts and take out the anomalies, take out the one-time payments, so because we know it's not going to happen. So you cannot include that in the base. So that's my only concern with the speakers.
Point of information, Mr. Chair. Sure. My understanding is that the amounts we're using are those 5-year tracking numbers.
Yes, Mr. Guerrero?
Yeah, OFB's tracking also includes what's happening this year. So when you take what's happening this year plus historical data, it comes out to these numbers that we're reflecting in the bill.
No, in the bill you said you used BBMR's numbers. My amendment is, to use the tracking,
yes.
right.
Whatever is reflected in the executive order is, the executive
Mr. Chair, I would
budget.
ask that we just go one by one on these things so that I can respond to any concerns that they have regarding particular revolving funds.
Okay, but you didn't ask the question yet, Senator Brown, so
No, I mean, I just wanted to get the
we're going to hold
feedback
off on you and we'll allow
Yeah, that would
to
be,
go
that would
each
be
one and then
helpful.
we work it. Okay,
would be
Madam
helpful,
Speaker,
Mr.
go ahead, proceed.
And I think Senator Ada had the floor, right? Or
No, we're going to wait for your interaction so that there's an education process here.
Oh.
Okay, and it helps everybody come to a favorable, hopefully, conclusion.
If I may, for the account like the sanitary inspection, if you take the tracking number of 167 versus what is being requested in the executive budget, it's almost a 33% jump. Okay, higher, because you're going from 115, which is what we're recommending, to 167. The difference is $51,000. So that's a lot for this particular account simply because it's small. But if you take the healthy environmental health fund.
yeah, could you just maybe then give us the 5-year tracking on this sanitary inspection revolving fund? 5-year average?
We only use the 3-year, Senator. Just a 3-year tracking. Because if you use the 5-year tracking, it's going to go lower. So that's the method we used. We try to be as current as possible, considering all the conditions that are happening out there in recent years. We don't want to go too far back because it's going to affect the average.
Okay. If you could tell us whatever average you have, the point is, we didn't use your averages in the bill. You used BBMR's numbers. And so I'm just suggesting that if there is more money in these funds, that they be allowed to use them. And if they're not, if this money is off, like all of our predictions might be, then, obviously, they won't be able to use that. But if it is sitting in that revolving fund, then, it allows them to use it. So these numbers came from...
No, when I said we use BBMR's numbers, I also said we concur with them. We did our own analysis. We did our own trends, and we found that it's pretty close. So if we have a difference of $2,000-3,000, we normally take BBMR's number. But if we have a difference of $10,000 and $20,000 in an amount like this, we would recommend our number. But since the variance was nominal, there was no harm to take their number. So if you took the 3-year average in this particular fund, it's around $88,000 per annum. But if you take the last 3 current years, it bumps it up to 115. So that's what I'm saying. These are actual numbers from AS 400.
Is that 150, excuse me, is that 150 or 115?
115.
Oh.
So again, like in a fund like this, because the amount that we're trying to increase is almost 33% of the average, that's where I'm a little bit more shaky about. But if you take, for example, the other one that you're proposing, like the Environmental Health Fund,
Right.
that one is, I don't have a problem with that because right now we're budgeting it at 1.352 million. You would like to increase it to 1.39, which is a 37,000 increase. That I have no problem because the percentage increase is nominal. So I think 37% of 1.3, if you're asking me my opinion, I don't have a problem with that. We can justify it because the justification, we can say it's part of the tracking. And since the tracking is only not even less than 1% variance, I don't have a problem.
Senator Torres?
I had a question, Mr. Guerrero. Is there a provision in the budget that currently dictates where any excess revenues from these special funds go? You know, can you please identify that section and explain if excess revenues stay with the boards and commissions and agencies? Because I vaguely recall that anything in excess stays with them regardless of whether we've hit the target of tracking or not.
For the general fund, there is a provision that any excess revenue reverts back to the general fund. Okay, but on the special fund, it depends because each special fund is designed for specific agencies. In the agency's budget section, there is language on some of them that it can use up to what is collected in the fund. And that has been language in the past budgets.
So it just depends on which agency. So,
That's correct.
So
That's correct.
it's hard to tell just looking at where there were upwards adjustments here if that would be the agency. We'd have to look at specifically at those funds then, right?
Yes. What we normally do is those agencies that request it, in the past, it's always been kind of like just limited to what was been appropriated. But in reality, because these funds are created specifically to cover program costs, there is no problems allowing them to use up to the amount that is collected. That's just been the traditional way of doing it.
But that's important.
But may I also say that if we're going to allow them by dollar amount to do it, that is where we have a problem. If we allow them just to do the excess, because we don't know what the excess is, but the language and the provision says that, that's okay. But if we allow them to spend up to a certain amount, then if the monitoring, if the allotment process is not done correctly, they can actually spend more than what's actually being brought in because it's not being regulated to the allotment process. So if we allow them to spend up to $200,000, and for some odd reason it falls through the cracks and collection for the fund doesn't come in at $200,000, but we release the $200,000, then the general fund would have to come in and supplement or cover the difference of what has been released. Those are extreme cases, but it does happen.
Yeah, but I think for purposes of my question, you don't want to shortchange an agency in terms of approximating what they're going to receive in special funds. If in fact some are restricted to only a percentage being reverted back to their commission or agency use, and that's the point that I was getting at.
Yeah, there is provision in the law. Okay, if you look at, what chapter is that? No. If you look at page 146 of the bill, there is a section in there that allows special funds to be utilized by the agencies up the amount that is collected. 146, Section 11 of the bill. So that's kind of like a catch-all type of provision for these agencies. So again, Senator, this is one of the budgetary tools we try to give the agencies and the administration to give them the flexibility, to utilize whatever funds that are available to them without really restricting them too much.
Okay, so we're good. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Torres. Anyone else on this amendment? Anyone else on the amendment? If no one else wants to speak on the amendment, Speaker Talal, you may close.
Thank you. Oh, yes, again, thank you to OFB and to my colleagues. Yeah, again, the ones that I'm highlighting to change are just to up them to the tracking for what they are tracking this year. And the ones that I'm highlighting are revolving funds. The funds are very restricted as to how they can be used. The funds come into these revolving funds almost always based on fees or penalties. And so we want these, agencies to be able to use these fees that they have accumulated and not let them sit around. That's just another way to help them during these austere times, is to allow them what they have received, not to allow them to overspend. Nobody's proposing that here. I think there's huge protections against them from overspending. If the money doesn't come in, BBMR already has control of that. I think it's really, really, really an extreme case to propose that we're going to be allowing them to overspend here. These are tiny revolving funds, very restricted. I say let them use it for the purposes. Almost all of these are very important purposes. Let them use this to do their enforcement. Almost all of these are enforcement or, except for land management. To my colleagues, I hope I can get your support on this. Thank you.
Madam Speaker.
Oh, and the budget, the total's wrong. Yeah,
Okay,
the total on the bottom has to be amended by OFB or the clerks at the end. Yes, please.
Okay, I just wanted to make that clear. The total would be different. Senator Bluss, call for the vote.
What
What is the total?
the total?
What is the total? OB, can you please reflect what the total is?
The total should reflect $197,131,643. It's about a $3,000 decrease. Yeah. What's reflected, I believe, in the amendment is the sum of $200,131,643. It should be $197,131,643.
All right.
So the overall difference, if you could just put that on the record as well, the overall difference is between one.
What is the overall difference? Oh, wait, what is it?
Just because someone had asked me.
Why don't we just take a 1-minute recess while they just do the total to confirm it, and then they'll announce the total. I know it's minimum amount. Okay, let's take a short recess. Committee of the Whole is back in order. I'll have Mr. Guerrero please identify what is the total that is found on the next page.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Based on the amended bill, the total in the bill and the amendment totals $200,131,643. The correct amount should be $197,131,643 for a difference of $425,949.
Thank you, Mr. Guerrero. That being said, on the motion, are there any objection? No objection, motion passes. You had an objection? Yeah, and no objection. Motion passes. My colleagues, we will recess till 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Please drive safe and be safe. Thank you.